Welcome to the video on qualitative data analysis using NVivo. This video is designed for beginners of both qualitative data analysis and NVivo. It will cover the following contents. It will show you how to get started with NVivo. It will show you how to import sources, such as your transcripts of interviews. It will show you how to create cases and case classifications. It will provide an overview of how to code in NVivo. And it will give an overview of how to perform a text query or any kind of text analysis. At the end of the video, I will provide a recommendation on another video tutorial by someone else that gives a very good introduction into intercoder reliability testing. Before we jump into NVivo, let me give you a short introduction into the survey data that we will be using. A colleague of mine, Christopher Schlegel, working at Maastricht University, is performing an ongoing project where they are asking about cross-cultural experiences. I have had the opportunity to get an extract of this dataset, and I have 10 transcripts of interviews with respondents on their cross-cultural experiences. These 10 transcripts are coming in the form of PDF documents, listed or named by the respondent numbers. So this, for example, is the transcript of the interview with respondent number 1. Let us quickly open it so that you get an impression of what is in the data. You will see here that the survey itself was more of a quantitative nature involving open-ended or qualitative questions. And the data that I will represent here in the transcript is only a part of the whole data that was collected to keep it simple. You can see here that respondent number 1 is 22 years old, was a male, coming from Poland. And when we scroll down in the PDF document, we will find the answers of this respondent on more open qualitative questions. So for example, the respondent was asked to remember and visualize an important cross-cultural experience that had a lasting influence on his or her thoughts and behaviors in a cross-cultural situation. And then the respondent is providing an explanation, a description of what kind of cross-cultural experience from his or her opinion has had that important impact. You will see 2 further, more qualitative questions here. That is challenges and problems in a cross-cultural surrounding that were described by the respondent, and also contexts in which the respondent perceived that there were rather no problems or challenges attached. The idea now is that we will use these 3 open-ended qualitative questions to simulate the idea of coding qualitative data in NVivo. I will close the PDF document now and jump into NVivo with you. What a surprise! We will open NVivo by double-clicking on the respective symbol on our desktop. My computer is opening NVivo, which is coming in the version Professional and software version 11. As soon as the software is open, you can see that on the left-hand side you will find an overview of your recent projects done in NVivo. Plus, on the right-hand side, you have the option to open a blank new project. And we will be doing exactly this. We will open a blank new project and provide it with a nice title, and I will call it Cross-Cultural Experiences. And I will provide a description as well, which I will call Coding of Qualitative Data provided by Christopher Schlegel. In the file name here, you can browse and select a location where you would like to store your project, as usual in any other software. We will click on OK to finally open the software with our new project. The first thing that we can see as soon as NVivo is opening is on the left-hand side an overview of the different sources. We will concentrate in this video tutorial on internal sources. Internal sources are all the sources that we internalize. So for example, the transcripts of your interviews that we will bring into NVivo. We will further look at notes, and you can see when you click on notes that we can have notes or cases. We will concentrate on these 2. Notes basically are the codes that you provide when you code qualitative data. So for example, a topic, a word, a summary, whatever you would like to code. Cases would be the respondents, in this case, often the interview transcript that you are using. Another thing that we will be looking at is a classification. When we click on classification, there are different types of classifications. For our video tutorial, we will concentrate on case classifications. That is, we would like to classify our cases. To give you an example, we would have cases that are our different respondents, or the interviews with different respondents, and we can create a case classification in the form of how old is the respondent, what is the gender, so for example, the demographic characteristics, or any other classifying characteristics that you would store under a case for a respondent. Before we read the different documents into NVivo, so that is before we bring in our interview transcripts to NVivo, I find it quite useful to start with a case classification. That is, we will set up a new case classification scheme with all the classifying criteria that are of relevance. And these criteria are then already attributed to the transcript that we will bring into NVivo later. So we will start exactly with this case classification. For doing so, we will click with the right hand or the right side of the mouse and create a new classification. We create a new classification that we would call demographics and click on OK. For now, we only have created a classification scheme that is called demographics. So far, there is no further information attributed to that scheme. That's only kind of a folder that we have created for case classifications. We can now start creating attributes for that classification. Again, we do a right-hand click and we will create a new attribute. What I would be interested in for my example is the age of the respondent. So I will create an attribute which is called age. And here on the second menu item in the box, which is called values, we can create values for this age attribute. We add a new value and I will say I might have a respondent that is 20 years old. I might have a respondent of 21, 22, 23, and 24. I have selected these numbers as I already have an overview of the age range of the respondents in my transcripts. I will now click on OK. We can now see that age is created as a new attribute under our demographics classification. We can furthermore create another classification or another attribute under our classification. Again, we will do a right mouse click and create a new attribute. And we will create the attribute gender with the values, what a surprise, male and female. And click on OK. What we have right now is kind of a folder of classifications or an option of classifications that we can use to assign classifying attributes to our imported sources at the second stage that we will be now performing. We will now import our interview transcripts into NVivo. We do so by clicking on Sources, and you can see that per default, Internal Sources is already highlighted. We can use here on this kind of menu box the right mouse click to import our PDF documents in which we have saved our transcripts. You can see that you can also import other forms of documents. You can import an Excel data sheet, you can import Word documents, and so forth. In my example, I have created PDFs, so we will import our PDF transcripts. We click on it, and then a very familiar menu opens where we can select the folder in which we have saved our transcripts. And in my example, I have put the transcripts in my desktop to keep it simple. And there you can see them, respondent 1 to respondent 10. We will, for first step, use the respondent 1 to respondent 5. I will mark respondent 1 to respondent 5 and click on Open. I will now, before clicking on OK, click on More. And you can see that I have the option to code sources as cases. NVivo is making a distinction between a source and a case. So a source simply is the document in which we have, for example, our text, our interview transcript. And we have a case, which is then directly the respondent, the case that we will be looking at. A case can also be something else that you would like to analyze, but the case really is the item or the object that you are interested in your study. So we will code the sources as cases. We need to use, or we should specify a case classification. So NVivo is asking us to provide a case classification scheme. And that is where we click on select. And when you click on select, you see that you will find the demographics. That is the classification scheme that we have just brought into NVivo. And we will click on OK. The thing here is that if you would like to import different transcripts from different documents, you need to have a classification scheme. So it's not possible to import more than one document into NVivo as long as you do not have a classification scheme. That is the reason why we started with that. I click on OK. And you can see we have our respondents 1 to 5 as internal sources. If we click on, for example, respondent 5, you will see that NVivo is opening the PDF document that we could also open in our desktop. By now, we do not only have our sources, namely our respondent 1 to 5 in the form of PDF documents, but we should also have our case notes. To check if we have created case notes, we click on Notes, and we click here in this box on cases, which is by default done in my version. You can see that NVivo has created 5 case notes for the respondents 1 to 5. So in our example, each transcript is representing the transcript of an interview with a different case or respondent 1 to 5. If we now, for example, click in respondent 5, we see different version of the text that is saved in the PDF document for respondent 5. It is rather unstructured because NVivo is here not able to find out what the right structure is in our PDF document. It's just putting in all the text that is found in our PDF document. So in terms of the overview, I would say our PDF document is a better overview here. But what we find for our case notes is another important information. If we, for example, look at the case properties for respondent 5, we can see that we are able to bring in demographic information. So we already see that NVivo has prepared age and gender as potential attributes, and we can see here that we are now able to assign values for these attributes. So for respondent 5, we know that the respondent is 20 years old. We can see that here in the PDF document. And we know that it's a female. So we can now assign attribute values for each of our respondents. Click on OK. If we want to bring in the attribute values for all of our respondents, that is what we would need to do in NVivo. There are different automated coding procedures that could help you bring this information into NVivo. Depending on the version that you have, you will be able to use this automatic coding or not use this automatic coding. In my version, it would be possible to use an automatic coding from an Excel spreadsheet. However, it's causing some trouble, to be fully honest, when I do so. So for our example, and also for the example that we will be using later, where we will not have 300 different transcripts, but a handful, I think doing that manually is absolutely fine. So what would we be doing? We would open all our PDF documents or all our respondents and one by one bring in the information on case properties. So for respondent 1, we will bring in an age of 22 years and the gender male. For respondent 2, we bring in an age of 21 and the gender male. For respondent 3, to click on here, we will bring in an age of 24 and a gender female. And for respondent 4, we will bring in the information that this respondent is 22 years old and female. Okay, now we have all our cases in NVivo, including relevant case properties. For the case properties or the attributes and the attribute values that you would like to import or create in NVivo, you can of course create any kind of classification that you are interested in. Age and gender is only my example here. Before we finally start with our coding of our qualitative data, I will close some of the documents here to keep the overview. Close all of these and just let us keep respondent 5 open to give you an idea of what we're going to do right now. So the idea is that we now start coding the relevant information for each of the participants. So we'll be interested in coding the open-ended questions or the open-ended answers for each of the respondents on important cross-cultural experiences made, on challenges and problems faced in different cultural contexts, and on potential contexts where the respondent had the perception that there are no problems or challenges for him or her to get adapted or to feel well in that kind of cultural context. So that is the idea that we would like to implement into NVivo right now. Coding is happening in the form of nodes. And we here already know one of the nodes, which is our case node. But there's a different form of node, which is then also called node under nodes. And this kind of node is the folder or the folder or the file where you can save all the topic-wise information. So we could, for example, create 3 new nodes, which could cover all the information on important cross-cultural experiences, information on challenges and problems in cross-cultural context, and maybe on cross-cultural, I will call that facilitators. Yeah. For doing so, we will here under Nodes and Nodes, use the right mouse click and create a new node. We will create a new node which we call cross-cultural experiences. You could also provide a description if you would like to, depending on whether you feel that the name of the node is self-explanatory or not. I will just simply click on OK. And you can see that NVivo has now created a new node. In order to code information under a node, we could, for each of our respondents, highlight the text in our sources. In this example, the respondent is not recalling any cross-cultural experience. So there is no cross-cultural experience that we could code for this respondent. We could code don't recall. Maybe we are interested in that too. Let us just simulate that to show you how to code information right now. You could now mark the text, use the right mouse hand, and code the selected text under an existing node, which is here, the one and only node we have, cross-cultural experiences. Click on OK. Then you can see that under cross-cultural experience, one source is coded. Let us open the node cross-cultural experiences. If we open that, you can see a summary here where we can find out that respondent 5 has said, don't recall on cross-cultural experiences. You can also create a node while you are reading a document, which might be quite handy. Let us assume you are in the document and you would like to code the answer of this respondent as a cross-cultural challenge that was faced. I will highlight the text, use the right mouse inside, and say, code this selected text, add a new node, and I will call this node cross-cultural challenges. The location here is nodes. We could also select cross-cultural experience as the location. That would then mean that cross-cultural challenges would be a sub-node or subcode of cross-cultural experience. In my example, I will just keep it with the first level and stay with our nodes and say, okay. Then you can see that NVivo is automatically creating a new node, which is called cross-cultural challenges, and it's also creating the respective text as a source here. So for example, if we click on cross-cultural challenges, you see that the text we have just coded is now coded under cross-cultural challenges. Another option that I would like to show you is you could create a new node, and I will do that in this menu by now, which I would call cross-cultural facilitators. That would be the context where the respondents didn't face any problems or didn't face any challenges. Click on OK. Then you can see we have a new node, but we do not yet have any text that is coded under this node. And I would like to code this text here under the node. So I will mark the text and I can drag and drop this over to the node right here. So depending on your preferences in terms of working, you can use different options for finally coding text. There are different philosophies of how to code interviews or transcripts. And of course, you will need to find your own philosophy and your own best way to do it. My recommendation, if you start with transcripts of interviews or start coding transcripts of interviews, is that you start to code the different parts of your semi-structured interview guide. So that is, if you have a certain part on, for example, spontaneous association on a brand or something like that, you will first start to code these more general topics along which you have structured your interview guide. And then you can start substructuring, subcoding, developing new codes, and start with overall these first open coding process of your interviews. But this will facilitate a lot the overview of answers to different questions that you have generated in your survey. And that is exactly what we will be doing right now. We will first code the more general answers to these three different topics in our more structured interview guide here. So we will open up the answers of respondent 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we will code their answers as we did with respondent number 5. So we have respondent number 1, and respondent number 1 spoke about a spiritual tour of India, visiting some ashrams and so forth as an important cross-cultural experience. So we will code this under cross-cultural experiences. We will code the answer on cross-cultural challenges of respondent 1 under cross-cultural challenges, and the context in which there were no cross-cultural problems under cross-cultural facilitators. We do the same for respondent 2. Scroll down. We have a relevant cross-cultural experience. You see that I'm mostly using the drag and drop option. You will use whatever you feel is handy for you. We will have a challenge, young males that want to prove themselves, and a skiing trip to Switzerland, basically as a cross-cultural facilitator. You are, of course, also free to further code more text than I am coding here. If you are interested in coding also that this was about Switzerland, the skiing trip, you can also code Switzerland under cross-cultural facilitators. You can do so just to show you what the outcome will be here. NVivo is continuously reminding me that it has been more than 15 minutes since I last saved my document, so I will of course save the current status of my project by now. We will continue with respondent number 3. We will see that communism was kind of an important cross-cultural experience. We see that there were some closed-minded people in education abroad as a cross-cultural challenge. And we can see that this respondent had the perception that the life in the Netherlands is similar to Germany, which made it easy for him, the cross-cultural facilitator. And finally, respondent 4 had no mention on cross-cultural experiences, but is talking about some challenges faced and talking about a context in which there were no problems or challenges, which I will code under cross-cultural facilitators. Now we basically have coded all the answers to our semi-structured questions or to our semi-structured questionnaire for all of our 5 respondents, and we can continue analyzing the text. Let us first see what the outcome of this coding procedure is. I will close the original documents now and jump back into our cross-cultural experience, for example. We can see here now under the node cross-cultural experiences that all the different text, parts of text from each of the different respondents is now sorted one after the other under the node cross-cultural experiences. And if we are interested in learning about important cross-cultural experiences, we can now start more deeply reading the text and trying to find out what could be relevant subtopics for which we could create new codes to the text. If we want to create new codes, we can simply also code text which is now listed here under our nodes. So we could say important cross-cultural experiences deal around, what do we have here? Interaction with local people, maybe different institutional environments or differences in different cultural surroundings. We could start coding or creating new subcodes. I'll just show you how that works. We can mark text, we can do a right click, and then again, either code it under the codes that we have, create a new node for this text, and we can also use this function here, which is called code NVivo. For example, if we feel that the word that we have marked is already a good representation of the new node that we would like to create or the new code, we can click on code NVivo, and then NVivo is creating a new code with a word that we have just highlighted, which was called interacting. And we would like to have that as a subcode to what is it, cross-cultural experiences. So we just sort it under cross-cultural experiences. Just as an example. That is what you would do right now. You would start, create your code frame. Doing an open coding, doing an Excel coding, as we have discussed. That is what you would do right now. So far, NVivo is helping us with our text analysis by simply providing us with a structured overview of a lot of text along different codes or nodes that we have created ourselves. So it's providing us with a tool that helps us to keep the overview of a lot of qualitative information that we have gathered. Of course, there are also other options how NVivo is helping us analyzing text. These options are often bundled under a function which is called query. And if we click on query, we can see that we have different options to do kind of a search. First, very simple tool that we can use is a text search. Let us look what this option is helping us with. We could, for example, search for a certain text, for a certain word that we are looking for, that we are interested in, whether this is mentioned by the respondents. So for example, we have created a qualitative survey. We would have expected that respondents would talk about a certain word, a certain topic. So in our example, we might be interested in whether respondents are talking about interaction when they talk about cross-cultural challenges. So is interaction with other people a challenge that they mention, and is it a challenge that they mention very often or not? So we can search for the text interaction and see is that mentioned by the respondents, and we can see is that mentioned in selected items. So for example, we can check if that is mentioned by certain respondents, by certain cases, or under certain nodes. So in my example, I will see is interaction mentioned in the node cross-cultural challenges. I will click on OK. We can then, moreover, specify whether NVivo shall provide us with an exact match. So only if the respondent is talking about interaction, this text search will bring a result, or whether NVivo should use stem words such as interact or synonyms for interaction and so forth. Let us maybe use interaction and stem words and run a query. If we run a query, we can see that one respondent is obviously talking about interaction. Let us see what this respondent has said. We can look at the reference. So we can see that respondent 1 is talking about interaction in an educational setting, and it's about the Chinese culture and how they interact and how to react in that interaction. We can also, in this search function, look at the PDF document of the respondent. And when we do so, we can see that NVivo is highlighting the passages in the PDF document where the respondent is talking about this interaction. Another thing that NVivo is providing is a word tree. So it is providing us with an information which parts of text are coming along with a keyword that we have been searching. In our example, it's very easy and straightforward because it was only one respondent talking about interaction. But you can imagine that when you have larger text, more nodes that you are searching, and you do a word tree, it might be rather interesting to see what are the topics that the respondents are talking about in combination with a certain keyword. And you can feel free to play around a little bit with these kind of different options in terms of the exactness of the search. Another query function that I find rather interesting is the word frequency query. And that is something that you find here under the menu, query word frequency. If you jump into the word frequency query, you might be interested in finding out how often are certain words mentioned under a certain node that you have created. Let us assume that you have talked about spontaneous association for a brand, and you might be interested what are the spontaneous of the association that are most often mentioned by the respondent. Then this function is super useful for you. Let us, in our example, assume that you are interested in the mentions under cross-cultural challenges. So what kind of cross-cultural challenges are most often mentioned by the respondents? So we have already opened the word frequency query, and we can search again in all our sources, and we can search within our node cross-cultural challenges. Click on OK. And we are interested in the most frequent words that the respondents have provided under cross-cultural challenges. As long as we look for exact matches, you can see that NVivo is simply counting the number of times a certain word is mentioned in the survey. We can see that education is very often mentioned, like, setting, abroad, interact, and so forth. We might want to play around with stem words and synonyms here, because we might be not so interested in like these smaller words brackets or a very sophisticated differentiation between, for example, German and Germany or something like that. So we will run the query again. And then we can see that the word setting, education, expect, interact, like, abroad, a gap, something like that, something, a lack of something, actions, arguments, and so forth are the ones that are most often mentioned. In our example, with 5 interviews and a very short answer to a question, it might be as easy to just read through the open answers, but if we imagine that you have much more text, that is a super useful function in NVivo that you can use to analyze your data. In your survey, you might have interviewed different types of people. So you might have interviewed males and females, as in our example. You might have another example where you have interviewed students versus employees, something like that. So you might be interested in finding out how do the answers of these different types of people differ. For that purpose, there's another search function that is very useful, and that is called the matrix coding query. Let us jump into the matrix coding query. You can, in the matrix coding query, select classifications of respondents and contrast them with, for example, your nodes and your topics. Let us take the example where we will be interested in identifying whether males and females differ in their answers. So for the rows of our matrix coding query, we will select different cases and case classifications. So in the case classifications, under gender, we will check male and female as we are interested in contrasting males and females. I will click on OK. And here in this menu, you need to click further on Add to List so that NVivo is also understanding that you are now interested in that selection. That will be displayed in rows. And then under columns, you might select the content that you are interested in. Let us take an example. You might be interested in looking at the answers to cross-cultural challenges that were provided. Click on OK, and again, Add to List. Under Node Matrix, you can see that per default, you can search for AND, so you look for the demographics and the node that you have just selected. You also have different options here that you can play around with a little bit. We will leave it with our AND and run our query. NVivo is then presenting us with a matrix of different answers. We can see here that we have the males and the females, and we have here the cross-cultural challenges, and here we have some numbers 2 and 3, and we definitely need to check what is meant by 2 and 3. And that is sometimes a bit confusing because NVivo is presenting different cell content. So in my default version, it's presenting coding references, so the number of tags that you have marked in your different documents. But we might rather be interested in the sources coded or the cases coded. In our example, sources and cases are the same. So when we click on the cases, we still have 2 and 3. That means 2 males have said something about cross-cultural challenges and 3 females have said something about cross-cultural challenges. What is now interesting, we can now click into the matrix and open what was said by the males under cross-cultural challenges or on cross-cultural challenges. We can also see what did the females say under cross-cultural challenges. And we can just discover now what were the answers of our different respondents with a different gender type. If you have a more fine-grained coding, more fine-grained than I have, even the numbers might be interesting for you, as for example, if you have asked for spontaneous associations for a brand and you have already coded different brand attributes, you can immediately see how many times the respondents have answered that this certain brand attribute is associated with a certain brand. So that is also super helpful in order to identify what kind of mentions, answers were provided by different types of people in your survey. Depending on your software version, you might also have access to the query wizard. We'll just quickly open that, and then you can see that the query wizard is providing some other functions. So for example, you can see where particular terms occur in content. You can create this kind of a, how do you call it, word cloud, building on certain parts of your interview questionnaire and so forth. So if you have access to the query wizard, it might be interesting to explore it a little bit to see what further options do you have in order to search for different words, analyze your text. Basically, you now have everything that you need to start analyzing your qualitative interviews. You will find out, the more you work with NVivo, that there are some options to autocode, depending on the version that you have. So you might explore this a little bit using some other videos that are provided in YouTube. But basically, qualitative data analysis is a lot about reading text, interpreting text, creating your own notes, creating your own structures. So it's a lot more about the researcher involved in the study and in the research results than it is maybe in quantitative data analysis. Have fun with it. As promised, I have added another slide which provides you with a recommendation to a video that gives a demonstration of how to perform intercoder reliability testing in NVivo for your project. This video is part of a YouTube channel provided by Ben Meehan, and my impression from screening all the different videos which are on YouTube, from which I got a lot of inspiration, is that his channel is providing quite useful further videos also on digging deeper into other functions that NVivo is offering. So if you want to dig deeper into the software, I would recommend to explore his YouTube channel. In addition to this recommendation, you will find an NVivo exercise that is coming with our dataset, and that exercise is building upon the transcripts of respondents 6 to 10 that I will provide in Blackboard, also on our e-learning platform, respectively in ResearchGate. And the idea is that you import these transcripts into NVivo, create a case for each of these transcripts, check the classification sheet, and add some further classifications in the sheet, namely a classification for country of citizenship. That you code the answers of these respondents under existing nodes, that you develop new nodes to subcode the answers of all our respondents to really create an interpretation of the data. Don't forget to save the file in between. Then you should do your own text search building upon the answers of the 10 respondents. You do your own word frequency query, and you should perform a matrix coding query building on certain classifications, as you can see on the slide here. If available in your software, you might also explore the query wizard as introduced in the video. And don't forget to save the file under a new name so that you can make use of it later. Have fun in analyzing the qualitative data.